She called me boring, after sleeping with 3 strangers, but I didn't scream. I planned justice. I knew something was off the moment she sat down across from me. There was a silence to her that didn't belong. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who'd grown familiar, who no longer needed to fill every breath with words. No, this silence was tactical, a pause with a purpose. Her fork clinked once against the plate, then didn't move again. I had made her favorite: lemon herb salmon, roasted potatoes, arugula salad with that honey balsamic vinaigrette she used to moan over. She didn't even touch it. I cleared my throat. "You okay?" I asked, my voice barely louder than the crackle of the candles between us. She looked up slowly, and something in her eyes chilled me. Not sadness, not guilt, detachment. She exhaled, like she had rehearsed it in the mirror, then set her cloth napkin gently beside the untouched plate. Her wedding ring caught the light. That small gold band I had slipped on her finger 10 years ago beneath an old oak tree behind my parents' house. She used to call it my forever. Now she twisted it once and said, "I want a divorce." Just like that. No stutter, no build-up, like she was cancelling a magazine subscription. I blinked. What? She tilted her head, as if she was waiting for me to process it. "I've grown bored of you, Aaron." My name on her lips felt foreign, harsh. "Bored?" I echoed, almost laughing. "Is this a joke?" She didn't answer, just stared at me like she was evaluating a painting she no longer liked. I stood up, chair scraping across the tile. "Bored? That's it? No fight? No therapy? Just bored?" She crossed her arms, leaning back. "Don't make this dramatic." I stared at her. My wife. The woman I had loved through her anxiety spells, through her late-night creative breakdowns, through miscarriages and moves and marathon work weeks. The woman I had held when her mother died. The woman I once watched dance B, our foot in the rain, laughing like the world was still good. And now she was bored. That night, I couldn't sleep. I roamed the house like a shadow. Each room whispered fragments of our life. Framed photos, travel souvenirs, that stupid abstract art piece she made in year 2 that I had proudly hung in the hallway. I passed by the mirror in the foyer and didn't recognize the man staring back. At some point, I found myself in the closet, holding my wedding suit, the one I hadn't worn since that day under the oak. The cologne I wore then still clung faintly to the fabric. She used to call it home. Now, it just smelled like something left behind. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears felt like they were waiting for more evidence. Something felt off. The coldness, the script-like delivery, the timing, right after I had signed a major logistics contract for the business. A man doesn't just become boring overnight. I started noticing things. Subtle shifts. She'd been locking her phone more often. Leaving for art walks that never showed up on social media, which she usually flooded with curated content. She was too careful, too composed. Divorce was one thing, but this felt like a performance. Then, 4 nights later, I found it. Her tablet. She had gone to bed early, claiming a migraine. I was on the couch, staring at the dark. I heard the ding, a soft notification chime she always ignored. She'd forgotten to log out of her messages. I told myself not to look. Told myself it was paranoia, bitterness, that maybe she was just bored. Maybe this was just a phase, a crack in the marriage we could patch. But my hands moved before my conscience caught up. It wasn't boredom. It was strategy. There were messages, dozens of them, hidden under a name I didn't recognize at first, but then I saw the email address tied to it. Colin. Hawthorne. My blood ran cold. Colin, was a name I had buried 6 years ago. A man who nearly destroyed my company. A man who tried to absorb my logistics firm through a hostile buyout, all while smiling in my face. We had history. Bad history. And I had won barely through sweat and sacrifice. I'd never spoken to him again. Until now. And here he was, in my wife's messages. Long threads, attachments, discussions about my clients, comments like, "He's too trusting, use that." After the separation, his board will lean on you. That's the in. Play the emotional card. He folds fast. Her replies were colder than his. "Don't worry, he'll never see it coming. He still thinks I love him." I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened like a vice. The betrayal didn't come with fireworks. It came like slow poison. Quiet. Clinical. My hands trembled. I scrolled and scrolled. The timeline was months long. This wasn't a whim. This was architecture. Blueprints of my destruction. Designed by two people who knew exactly where to strike. I dropped the tablet on the table, staring at it like it had teeth. She wasn't bored. She was building something. And she was using my trust as the foundation. I remember whispering it aloud, just to hear the truth come out of my own mouth. You were never bored. You were building something. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move. I just sat there in the dark, wedding ring still on my finger, feeling it burn like it no longer belonged to me. I don't know why memories always come back in fragments. Never in a clean line, just flashes of color, scent, sound. But in the days after I found those messages, I couldn't stop remembering the beginning. Not the truth of it, but the version I had built in my mind for years. The first time I saw her, she was painting on the rooftop of a friend's loft. She was barefoot, high on something invisible, smearing red streaks across canvas while the city glowed behind her. I remember thinking, God, she's chaos in motion, beautiful and untouchable. She had that way of making you feel like her attention was a spotlight, and when it hit you, nothing else mattered. Her name was Elena. She was an artist, she said, but not in the I sell prints online kind of way. She wanted galleries, residencies, Europe, her own voice on the world stage. And me? I worked in freight logistics. Warehouses, routing systems, supply chain contracts, unglamorous, methodical stuff. I was good at it. Not brilliant, just dependable. The guy who built things slow and solid. She said that's what she liked about me, that I was anchoring. Her word. Said I kept her grounded. I wore that like a badge of honor. Funny how the same traits that draw someone in eventually become the things they weaponize against you. We got married a year later. Small ceremony. My brother stood by my side, holding back the doubt in his eyes. He pulled me aside after the vows, said quietly, "She's bright, man, but she doesn't slow down for anyone." I told him she didn't have to. I'd keep up. That was my first mistake. When we moved in together, she asked to use the second bedroom as her studio. I gave it to her, no questions asked. Took out a loan so she could leave her barista job and paint full-time. I told myself we were investing in us. When my company offered me a promotion, regional manager, more money, but a move out of state, she cried on the kitchen floor, said she couldn't leave her gallery contacts. I turned the job down. "Thank you," she whispered into my chest that night. "I love that you always choose us." But over time, us started looking a lot like her. The house changed. My guitar ended up in the garage, never to be touched again. My gym bag collected dust. My friends faded one by one. Too negative, she said. Too stuck in the past. I stopped calling them. I didn't notice the isolation at first. I thought it was just marriage, making compromises, becoming one. But now I realize I wasn't at becoming one with her. I was becoming less of myself. And still I loved her. God, I loved her. She'd paint all night, music blasting, the house filled with turpentine and moonlight. And I'd sit in the hallway, watching her from the shadows, thinking, look what I helped her become. But I don't think she ever thought the same about me. I remember one night in year 3. She came home from a gallery showing a little drunk, laughing too loudly. I was in bed already, exhausted from a 12-hour workday. She crawled in beside me and whispered, I danced with another man tonight. I turned to her. What do you mean? Nothing happened, she said, tracing my chest with a fingertip. He was just interesting. I forgot how fun it is, being seen. I felt something hollow out in me right then. But I smiled, kissed her forehead and said, You're always seen. She kissed me back, but her eyes drifted past me, as if she was already walking away. That pattern continued. Subtle shifts, smirks when I mentioned my work. How's your world of boxes and barcodes? She'd tease. Bet that really gets your blood pumping. She laughed when she said it, but it chipped something in me every time. There was one dinner, maybe 5 years in, when she introduced me to one of her collectors. A tall, smug man in a blazer with no undershirt, and the kind of watch you don't wear unless you want it seen. This is Aaron, she said, barely looking at me. He's the rock that lets me fly. He extended a hand and said, Ah, the sponsor. She laughed. I didn't. And then came him. Colin Hawthorne. He entered our lives as a competitor years ago, tried to buy out my company with a smile and a handshake, all while sabotaging our suppliers behind the scenes. When I refused the deal, he tanked a major shipment by manipulating our logistics partner. Almost cost me my business. I survived. Barely. Swore I'd never let him near me again. Elena knew that story. I told her every detail. We'd stayed up late the night after I beat Colin's acquisition attempt. She made us drinks. Her told me I was her hero. I believed her. And now, 6 years later, she was in his messages, calling me boring, predictable, calling him brilliant. How long had they been circling each other? Was this always part of her arc? The gallery girl who married the stable man, used his spine to climb, then leapt to the next platform once she could see it. I think that's what gutted me most. Not just that she betrayed me, but that, somewhere deep down, I wasn't surprised. There's a photo I kept for years. The two of us in black and white standing on a balcony in Lisbon. I'm kissing her temple. She's laughing into the wind. I used to think that photo captured something real. But now I look at it differently. I see the way her eyes are open, even as I kiss her, staring at something in the distance. Even then, I think she was already leaving me. She didn't fall out of love. That's the lie I told myself to stay sane. The truth. She was never building a life with me. She was building leverage, one step at a time. And I gave her every tool she needed. They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back. They're wrong. It feels like a scalpel. Precise, patient, silent. And by the time you realize what's happening, the blood's already pooling at your feet. The moment I read the messages between Elena and Colin, I didn't feel pain. Not yet. Just a cold stillness. Like the oxygen in the room had frozen mid-air. He still thinks I need him. Cute, right? Let him pay for the new studio before we ghost. You really are the only one who sees me. He won't fight back, he never does. Every word was a scalpel stroke. Not killing me outright. No, she wanted a slower death. A hollowing out. And God help me. She knew exactly how to do it. The first time I met Colin Hawthorne, he wore a $3,000 suit and a wolf's smile. He complimented my handshake, insulted my margins, then, Tried to buy me out like I was some worn-down gas station he could turn into a Starbucks. I told him no. So he went behind my back and sabotaged my most loyal vendor. That move nearly broke my company. I rebuilt it with my own 2 hands, burning through savings, sleepless nights, and pride. Elena was there the whole time, making coffee in the morning, pretending to care, saying all the right words with her paint-stained hands, resting gently on my shoulder. But now, I see it clearly. She wasn't with me through the storm. She was studying me, learning where the walls cracked, where the hinges squeaked, where the locks would give. She wasn't my muse. She was my surveyor. It's almost funny, the little moments I'd overlooked. Like how she pushed me to get a joint account, then suggested I put the house in her name for tax reasons, or the time she insisted we fire my assistant, the one who once caught her flirting with a gallery buyer at a company dinner. Said she didn't like the girl's vibe. She cleared the board one piece at a time, removed anyone loyal to me, turned my house into her kingdom, turned me into a walking, talking investment. All while I smiled and asked if she needed anything. That night, after reading those messages, I walked to the garage, stood there in the dark, just breathing. That's when I saw it. My guitar, covered in dust, bent string, untouched for 6 years. I ran a finger down the neck. Dust flaked like old scabs. There it was, the last part of me before her. The man who once played music, had friends, told stupid jokes and sang off-key. The man who laughed without asking permission. That man was gone, starved, erased. And she didn't kill him. I did. One sacrifice at a time. I didn't confront her that night. No yelling, no slamming doors. Why? Because suddenly I understood something. Elena wasn't a selfish woman who made a mistake. She was a planner, a designer, a long-game player. She architected my ruin. And you don't confront the architect while the building's still on fire. You study the blueprints. You memorize every corner. You wait until the perfect moment. Then you pull the foundation out from under her. The next morning, I made her breakfast, eggs, black coffee, extra toast the way she liked it, crunchy enough to scrape the roof of your mouth. She walked into the kitchen barefoot, humming Lana Del Rey, wearing one of my shirts like it was hers. I watched her eat. Every bite, every glance at her phone, every fake smile she thought I didn't see through. She said, "Thanks, babe. You're too good to me." And I said, "Always." In that moment, I didn't feel love, or hate, or even heartbreak. I felt calculation. It was my turn now. Over the next few weeks, I played the part. The loving husband, the doting partner, the boring man who wouldn't dare fight back. Meanwhile, I did the following. In silence, transferred our savings to a separate trust under my sister's name. Legal, quiet, traceable only by me. Contacted a forensic accountant to gather proof of Elena's misappropriation of my business credit card. She'd been funneling funds into her personal art brand for months. Reinstated my old assistant under a different name. She helped me retrieve deleted texts, emails, and call logs. Installed a hidden camera in her studio under the excuse of insurance compliance. She never questioned it. Met with my lawyer. Told him I wanted a clean, cold exit. No courtroom drama, just strategy. Every night, I'd lay beside Elena, her head on my chest, her lies dripping like slow poison, and I'd think, "You really thought I wouldn't fight back. You forgot who built this life, who funded your paint, your gallery shows, your passport stamps. You forgot every hour I worked while you slept. Every no I said to myself just to say yes to you. You forgot, but I didn't. There was one moment, 3 weeks into the plan, that almost broke me. She was painting again, in the studio I paid for. She had music on, soft jazz. Her back was turned. She didn't know I was watching. And for a second, just a second, I saw the girl from the rooftop again. Barefoot, wild, alive. And I remembered why I had loved her. But then her phone buzzed, and she picked it up, laughing at the message, whispering, "Colin?" And I snapped back. Not out of rage, not out of jealousy, out of resolve. There's a final stage in betrayal people don't talk about. It's not grief, or anger, or revenge. It's clarity. The kind that makes you breathe deeper, move quieter, see farther. It's the moment you stop seeing your betrayer as a person and start seeing them as a pattern. And patterns? Patterns can be predicted. Patterns can be unraveled. She designed my ruin. So now, I'll design hers. Not with fire, with silence, with grace, with precision. Because when the architect forgets the weight of the walls she builds, she never expects them to fall. There's a cabin 3 hours north of the city. No cell service, no internet, no clocks. The kind of place you forget the world even exists. I inherited it from my grandfather after he passed, a man of fewer words and more silence. He once told me, when a machine breaks, you don't shout at it. You take it apart, clean it, find the piece that stopped working. Maybe I came here to find that broken piece in me? Or maybe I just wanted to stop hearing her voice in my head. Either way, the cabin was waiting. It greeted me like it remembered. The scent of cedar and thyme, dust curling through sunbeams, old boots by the door, a kettle older than my first car. And that guitar, the one I hadn't touched since her, still hanging on the wall, still waiting for someone to care enough to tune it. I ran my thumb across the strings. It groaned, out of tune, but not broken, just like me. The first morning, I woke before sunrise. The silence was so deep it had shape, a pressure behind the ears, a kind of velvet stillness that wrapped around your lungs. No emails, no headlines, no Eleanor. I made coffee in silence, drank it on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a hawk circling above the pine line. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just existed. And that, strangely, hurt more than anything. Because for years, I thought I couldn't survive without her presence. But now she was gone, and I was still breathing. On the second day, I found my old sketchbook. Pages yellowed, edges curled. The last drawing was from Lisbon. Eleanor, looking out a window. Her eyes half open, distant. Back then, I thought it was dreamy. Now I knew it was detachment. She'd already left me in her mind. She just hadn't packed yet. I tore the page out and burned it in the fireplace. Not out of rage, out of mercy. By day 4, I stopped counting the hours. There were no clocks in the cabin. That was grandfather's rule. He used to say, "Time ain't yours, attention is." So I gave my attention to the trees, the coffee, the creek behind the cabin that sounded like wind chimes over rocks. And at night, I gave my attention to the fire, to the way wood cracks under heat, the way warmth creeps slowly, then all at once. Same as betrayal, same as healing. One night, maybe night 5, maybe 6, I took the guitar off the wall. It felt heavier than I remembered. I sat on the edge of the bed, tuned it with muscle memory, then let my fingers find chords I hadn't touched in a decade. The sound was rusty, imperfect, alive. And for the first time in years I sang. Not for her, not for anyone, just for me. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. There's a type of silence that isn't emptiness. It's fullness. It's the sound of something returning. On what I guessed was the 7th day, I stood in front of the mirror. No razor, no comb, no performance. Just a man with sunburned cheeks, rough. Hands and eyes that didn't flinch anymore. I wasn't healed, but I was here. That counted. There's something else I did on the last night. I took the Lisbon photo. You know the one where her eyes are open. I drew over it with a charcoal pencil, just lightly. Closed her eyes. Not out of vengeance, not to erase her, but to finally let her rest in the past, where she belonged. And for me? That was the moment I knew I could leave the cabin. I packed light. Left the guitar on the bed with the string still humming from the night before, and just before I locked the door, I pinned a note to the wall. Time is a lie. Attention is truth. Keep yours. I didn't sign it, didn't need to. Driving back, I passed a roadside diner. Same one Elena and I stopped at once during a storm. She'd laughed at the waitress's accent. I'd felt embarrassed. This time, I stopped alone. Ordered black coffee and eggs. The waitress smiled, called me hun. I smiled back and meant it. Not as a performance, as a man waking up. When I reached the city line, my phone buzzed back to life like a hornet's nest. Missed calls, texts, bank alerts, emails from my lawyer. One from Colin too. Bold, smug. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because the man who left for the cabin, he would have read it, obsessed over it, tried to find meaning in his enemy's words. But the man returning, he doesn't anchor his worth to liars. He builds his own maps now. I went home, sat in the driveway a while. The house looked different, not smaller, just less powerful. Like a castle that used to be haunted, but the ghost had moved out. Inside, Elena's things were still everywhere. Paint tubes, a scarf over the lamp, that stupid Lisbon photo. Now without her eyes. I didn't touch a single thing. I just stood in the center of the room and said aloud, "This isn't yours anymore. Not to her, to myself." There's a moment after a storm where everything's soaked, torn, broken, but quiet. That's where I was now. Standing not in rage, not in grief, just in the debris, looking at what remained. I thought healing would feel like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like choosing not to flinch. The morning after the cabin, I sat in my car outside my own house. My name was still on the deed, but it didn't feel like mine. I looked down at the keys in my hand. There was one to the house, one to the cabin, and one to my old office drawer. That one I hadn't touched in months. Funny how a piece of cut metal can carry so much of your old self. I slipped it on my ring finger where my wedding band used to be. A silent reminder. Some locks aren't meant to open again. Inside, the air smelled like her shampoo, the kind she used after yoga, lavender and mint. That scent used to make me feel home. Now, it made me feel hijacked. I opened the windows, let the cold air slap the walls, not out of spite, but to reclaim oxygen. I took down the Lisbon photo, the one I had redrawn in charcoal, her eyes now peacefully shut. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me choosing what stayed on my walls. I replaced it with a photo of my grandfather standing on the porch of the cabin. Wrinkles, cigarette, no smile, but his eyes were honest. Real men don't smile for cameras. They smile when no one's watching. That afternoon, I made a list on a yellow legal pad. Lawyer, finalize split. HR, document misconduct. Gym, rejoin. Guitar, New strings, therapist, maybe. I stared at that last one. Therapist. In my world, you didn't talk to strangers about pain. You swallowed it. Buried it under work, whiskey, and weekends. But burying things doesn't make them disappear. It just lets them rot closer to your heart. That night, I lit the fireplace. The same one where I'd once tried to burn away her betrayal. But tonight wasn't about burning. It was about warming. I picked up the guitar, the one I'd left tuned since the cabin, and I played again. Not sad, not angry, just real. Rusty chords, clean rhythm, voice a little steadier. I sang about mornings, about starting over, about being a man who doesn't wait for permission to feel proud of himself. The next day, I walked into PPG Industries. Same glass doors, same buzzing lights, same fake smiles. But something had changed. Me. I wasn't the man who walked in broken. I was the man who'd walked through fire and remembered how to breathe. I met with HR, gave them copies of recordings, emails, and one very damning invoice with Eleanor's name and Colin's forged signature. They listened in silence. Not because they were shocked, but because they knew. And now, they couldn't look away. When I left that office, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor with a spine. 2 days later, I saw Colin in the elevator. He smiled. Lazy, smug, like nothing had changed. "Hey, buddy," he said. "How's the missus?" I didn't smile, didn't curse, didn't swing. I just looked at him and said, "Your legacy will be a trail of people who finally stopped pretending you matter." And I watched the smirk crack. Just a little. That was enough. At home, I cleaned out our bedroom, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I boxed her things, labelled it a life I outgrew. I didn't drop it off at her new place. I didn't set it on fire. I just mailed it. No note, no forwarding address. Let her wonder. That weekend I rejoined the gym, started small, rowing machine, light weights, some laps. I saw a man in the mirror, one who hadn't looked back at me in years, not bulked up, not shredded, just awake. There's a difference between revenge and rebirth. One wants them to feel pain. The other wants you to feel peace. Sunday morning I drove out to the cabin again. Not to hide. To build. I brought tools, a new mattress, a bottle of good bourbon, and the guitar. I hung it by the fireplace. Not because I was done playing, but because some sounds deserve sacred spaces. I carve. It's something into the inside of the closet door. Not for anyone else to read. Just for me. The man I used to be forgave too easily. The man I am now remembers, builds, and walks forward, never begging to be seen. You don't always get the moment you imagine. No dramatic courtroom standoff. No rain-soaked rooftop confession. Sometimes your moment comes with coffee breath and fluorescent lights. I was sitting in the PPG boardroom, clean-shaven, dark blazer, leather notebook in front of me. Colin sat 3 seats down. Same lopsided grin. Same expensive watch he probably hadn't paid for. To my right, 2 members from legal, 1 from HR, 1 from Shanghai operations, and across the table, her, Eleanor. She wore confidence like a costume now. Everything sharp. Sharp nails, sharp suit, sharp smirk. But beneath the angles, her eyes blinked faster than they used to. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said coolly. I looked up, calm. "I didn't expect you to forget what I looked like." But we both changed, didn't we? No anger, no heat, just truth. I had the email thread printed and sealed, The one Colin thought he'd deleted. The one in Mandarin, where he promised her to the client, and where she accepted. I slid it across the table. "I lived in Shanghai," I said quietly. "Remember?" Silence. Cold, raw silence. Colin swallowed. Elena's mouth opened, then closed. And in that moment, for the first time, she didn't have a script. I stood up. I didn't need to wait for the meeting to end. I didn't need the company to collapse. I just needed to say this. You both broke something in me. But what came out through the cracks wasn't weak. It was light. As I walked out of the building, I passed by the wall of founder photos. There I was. 5th row, 3rd from the left. A photo taken 4 years ago, smiling, slightly slouched, eyes unsure. I pour, better not to reminisce, but to whisper goodbye. To the man I used to be. To the man who stayed too long in small rooms, with people who didn't clap when he won. The cabin felt warmer now, not because of the fire, but because I wasn't running from anything anymore. I had returned, not to a place, but to myself. I opened the guitar case and tuned it by ear. The strings were tight, responsive, eager. Like a heart healed, not untouched, but resilient. I wrote a song that night. 1 verse for every betrayal. 1 chorus for every silent cry I swallowed. And a final line. Your storm passed over me, but it didn't own me. A week later, I got a letter. Handwritten, from Elena. She never used ink before, just texts, emails, voice notes. Inside were 3 words. You were right. No apology, no begging, no blame. Just those 3 words. I folded the letter, tucked it in the back of my guitar case, and never read it again. Some stories don't need sequels, just an ending that honors the scars. I started giving free lessons to kids in town, guitar, art, anything creative. Not because I was trying to reinvent myself, but because I'd remembered something. Real men don't rebuild for applause. They rebuild so no one else has to live in rubble. There's a bench outside the cabin now. I carved another line under the first one, on the closet door, right beneath the old one about the man I used to be. I have returned, not for revenge, but for peace. And when people ask me what happened, why I left the city, the job, the woman, I just smile. Not to hide anything, but because I have nothing left to prove. Some days I still think about her, the way betrayal wore her skin. But those thoughts come and go, like wind through the trees, heard, not held. I live without clocks now. Time exists, but it doesn't control me. Only purpose does, only truth. And every time I pick up the guitar, I remember that night in the cabin, the scream, the fire, the shattered illusion. And I smile, because that's where he was born, the man who walked out, the man who never looked back, the man I chose to become.